Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Joey Francis, your life, love, and relationship coach. Thank you so much for joining me. Sell me this pen. That question makes people uncomfortable because it exposes how quickly communication turns into performance. Most people hear it and immediately start talking smooth ink, comfortable grip, reliable design, great price. Essentially, you're going to think that this pen is literally the key to your empire. It's not. It's just a pen. The better answer starts somewhere else. Do I even need one? Because if I don't need a pen, selling it to me isn't service, it's pressure. A good salesperson doesn't begin by forcing the product into someone's life. They try to understand the person in front of them. What problem is sitting in front of them? What matters most? And would this actually make their life better, easier, more organized, more efficient, or more enjoyable? Curiosity matters because the moment it disappears, the conversation changes. The person speaking stops listening for truth and starts chasing an outcome. And that is bigger than sales. See, my father always taught me that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that we should listen twice as much as we talk. It's a very simple line, and it's unfortunately hard to live by, because a lot of people do the opposite. They speak first, assume quickly, defend early, and listen only long enough to figure out where to jump in. Call it strategy with sound, not conversation. And once the goal becomes winning, honesty starts leaving the room. Let's think about this. What does conversation become when nobody is trying to win? Because I think that question matters more than people even realize. Everybody says they want better communication. It sounds mature, emotionally intelligent, and very much like something you say after reading 3 relationship posts and buying a notebook with a meaningful quote on the front. The logic of me. You can get it on Amazon at joyfrancis.com. But the real test is what happens when the conversation doesn't flatter you. The struggle usually begins there. A person may ask for honesty, then punish the first honest thing they hear. Openness sounds wonderful until it challenges the story they were hoping to protect. Emotional maturity can become a costume when someone has all the right words, but can't handle a truth that makes them uncomfortable. At that point, the conversation isn't opened. It's controlled. And listen, I don't say that from a high horse. We all have places where our ego gets to the room before our curiosity does. The other person is speaking, but your mind is already somewhere else. You're finding the flaw, preparing the comeback, building the defense, waiting for the sentence that lets you feel right. And granted, I'm extremely guilty of doing this myself. That is preparation. Real listening is different because it requires a willingness to be affected by what the other person says. Preparation protects the position you walked in with. That difference changes everything. Once your position becomes the priority, the other person slowly turns into an obstacle. Their words are no longer information. They become something to manage, correct, avoid, beat, or control. This is where communication starts turning into competition, and competition inside communication, it creates a very strange kind of dynamic. See, 2 people can talk for an hour and both leave feeling unheard. Words were used, points were made, explanations were offered. And the neighbors may have even learned a few things about the 2 of you. But neither party made a difference because the goal was never understanding. The goal was winning. And in dating, this shows up very early. Of course, people try to make a good impression. Nobody goes on a first date and opens with their worst qualities. Hi, nice to meet you. Just so you know, I overthink texts. I get emotionally weird when I'm hungry, and sometimes I pretend I'm fine when I'm silently building a legal case against you. Now, that might be honest, but maybe you want to wait until after the appetizer before you divulge that sort of thing. And there's nothing wrong with presenting yourself well. Shower, look presentable, be polite, try not to be late. That's a massive pet peeve of mine. The problem begins when the entire interaction becomes a performance. Most people don't come into this with curiosity. They date to be chosen. The result is a very different kind of conversation. Answers become polished, stories get edited. The uncomfortable truth hides behind charm, humor, mystery, or whatever version of themselves they feel like has the best chance to be liked. Now, that isn't malicious. Loneliness can make people give you the answers they think you want. Insecurity can turn a date into a sales pitch. Fear can convince someone that the real version of them won't be good enough. But fear can make people slightly dishonest. This is why you have to listen beyond the answer. Pay attention to how someone speaks when there's nothing to gain. Notice the way they explain their past, handle disagreement, respond to inconvenience, and react when the conversation doesn't revolve around them. See, conversation reveals character, usually through small leaks. A person can claim kindness while telling every story with contempt. Someone may say they want commitment while keeping an escape plan. Another person might call themselves easygoing, yet the whole conversation feels very tense. This is why I keep saying chemistry isn't enough. Chemistry tells you there's energy in the room, but conversation tells you whether that energy will help you or harm you. A first date should not feel like an interrogation, sitting across from someone, shining a light in their face, asking questions like a robot. But you should be collecting information. You are learning whether the person in front of you has enough self-awareness to be honest. Are they curious about getting to know you? Can they let the conversation be real? If you aren't paying attention, performance can look like compatibility. Someone may say all the right things because they know how to read the room, and you may mistake good marketing for a good match. This is where you get ahead of yourself. Attraction gets your attention, but conversation tells you whether there's actually something worth paying attention to. And there is another side to this too. The problem isn't always someone selling you a false version of themselves. Your own story can walk into the conversation before the other person gets a fair chance. And now we're dealing with a different kind of problem. A conversation can't be honest when you're speaking to the version of someone you invented. And granted, this happens a lot more than people even admit. You notice someone's race, nationality, clothing, age, job, accent, music taste, confidence, softness, humor, religion, money, family, situations, or lifestyle. And your mind starts filling in the blanks it has no right to fill. Then the person tells you your assumption is wrong. If you're more committed to your story than their answer, the conversation has no chance. Now you're getting to know them. You're testing whether they match the stereotype you brought. And that is very unfair. And if you aren't careful, it will look like intuition. But see, the thing is that real intuition pays attention. Projection is the one that takes a shortcut and calls itself wisdom. The difference matters, especially in dating, especially when just dealing with other human beings. Kindness can look suspicious when kindness has been used against you before. Interest can feel like pressure when closeness scares you. A sincere compliment can sound like bait when pain has trained you not to trust anyone. I understand why that happens. Pain teaches people to look for danger. If you've been lied to, used, embarrassed, manipulated, betrayed, or made to feel stupid for trusting someone, your nervous system remembers. It tries to protect you before your heart gets involved again. That instinct can be useful. It can also make you very unfair. Protection becomes projection when the person in front of you has to answer for somebody else's damage. Their behavior is no longer the standard. Your past, your fears, your assumption becomes the lens you see them through. And listen, I get it. Protect yourself. I believe in that completely. Pay attention to patterns, take discomfort seriously, and please don't hand someone your trust because they smiled. Remember, we don't want to be doing that either. But suspicion isn't the same as discernment. Discernment listens before it decides. Suspicion writes the ending first and then searches for validation. The distinction can change how you date, how you love, and how you move through the world. Some people think they're being wise when they're really being guarded. A locked door can protect you, but it also stops people from coming in. If nobody can get close enough to show you who they are, you may feel safe while standing trapped inside your own world. You end up with isolation and never connection. The same thing happens inside relationships. At some point, the person in front of you can stop being a person and become a role. The selfish one, the dramatic one, the lazy one, the difficult one, the one who never listens, or the one who always makes everything about themselves. Maybe there is a pattern in there. Sometimes people earn the reputation they're carrying. If the same behavior keeps returning after every apology, your concern may be evidence rather than fear. But relationships get stuck when evidence and assumptions start blending together. Evidence is what someone consistently does. Assumption is the meaning you attach before you have enough truth. See, you need to know the difference. Because if someone has genuinely changed while you keep speaking to the old version of them, the relationship has nowhere to go. They may be trying to repair something, and you may still be dragging their past self back into every conversation. And the thing is, frustrations can end up building on both sides. One person feels like nothing they do is ever enough. The other feels foolish for even considering trust again. It is a hard place to be. The way through it isn't a denial, it's honesty. Bring the pattern, the present, and your own fear into view. Then ask whether the conversation is responding to what is happening now or reacting to what happened before. The question can be uncomfortable. Good. Some questions should be uncomfortable. They get past the performance. In relationships, trying to win often looks like defending your intentions instead of understanding the impact. Your partner says, "That hurt me." And your mind immediately wants to explain why you didn't mean it that way. And here's the thing, maybe you didn't. And that does matter, but it isn't the whole conversation. A mature conversation can hold two truths at the same time. Your intention may have been clean, and the impact may still need attention. If proving your intention matters more than understanding their experience, the conversation becomes about your image instead of the wound. This is how couples lose each other while standing in the same kitchen. Someone brings up pain and the other person hears accusation. A need gets expressed, but pride turns it into criticism. The whole thing becomes a courtroom and the relationship has to sit there waiting for the verdict. And then the ego loves that courtroom. It wants the evidence, the dates, the examples, screenshots, a closing argument, and a little dramatic music playing in the background. Love doesn't heal because someone wins the case. It heals when both people care enough to understand what the fight is carrying. You aren't accepting blame for things you didn't do. Every feeling isn't automatically a fact. Slowing down simply gives you a better question. What is this person trying to tell me about their experience? That is very different from, how do I prove they're wrong? Some people are hard to talk to. There are people who claim to value communication while making honesty expensive. You bring them something real and suddenly you're dealing with defensiveness, punishment, sarcasm, withdrawal, guilt, or a 5-hour argument that started with one sentence and somehow ended in your childhood. It wears people out. Over time, the relationship can become quiet, not peaceful. See, peace has safety in it. Quiet can be full of things people stop saying because speaking never helped. This is what winning can cost. You may keep your pride and lose access to someone's truth. Friendships have their own version of this too. See, advice is a perfect example. Sometimes people give advice because they care. Other times, advice is about controlling someone. The difference lives in the intent. Are you trying to understand what the person needs, or are you pushing the answer that makes you feel useful? A friend may not need a lecture. They may need patience, a better question, or enough space to say something messy without you immediately turning into a motivational speaker. And yes, people do need to hear the truth, but truth delivered without care often becomes another way for someone to resent you. Work can be just as bad. A person can push an idea before they understand the problem. They may call it leadership, confidence, or initiative. But if they've never listened, they're basically selling the pen to someone who doesn't need it. This is why I started off with a sales example. Good sales isn't manipulation. At its best, selling is problem solving. You understand the need, educate the person, explain the options, and offer something that genuinely helps. Bad sales tries to win the moment, and bad communication follows the same pattern. It extracts agreement, forgiveness, validation, compliance, attention, or reaction without caring enough about the person on the other side. And see, people can feel that. They may not always have the words for it, but being moved instead of heard has a feeling. The hidden hook, the trap inside the question, the difference between curiosity and strategy. People can pick up on it. After enough of that, people stop opening up. Then the person who created the environment acts confused. I have no idea why they don't talk to me anymore. Well, let's have a look at what happened when they tried. If every honest sentence became something they had to defend, silence starts to make sense. See, communication isn't only about expressing yourself clearly, it's also becoming someone who can receive the truth without turning it into a war. There are people who speak beautifully and listen terribly. Their emotional language may be strong: healing, boundaries, accountability, self-worth, communication, attachment, triggers, trauma, standards. The terms are all there. But the language of growth means nothing if the behavior underneath it stays selfish. A person can sound mature and still be impossible to reach. See, this episode isn't only about what you say. It's about what you're trying to accomplish while you're saying it. Before a serious conversation, ask yourself one question. What am I trying to get out of this? The answer may not be very flattering. You could be trying to look innocent, avoid shame, force reassurance, punish someone, secure approval, regain control, or make the other person feel what you felt. But if you refuse to see your own agenda, your conversations will keep becoming performances with better excuses. Another question matters just as much. What story have I already written about this person? Confidence may look like arrogance if you're uncomfortable with boldness. Interest may feel needy when closeness scares you. A different communication style may seem dismissive because you're used to being ignored. Someone can remind you of a person who hurt you, and suddenly every small similarity starts looking like proof. Useful instincts exist. Fear can also sound very intelligent when it wants to protect itself. The only way to know the difference is to stay present long enough to actually collect the truth. Truth takes more than one sentence. It needs conversation, observation, time, and enough humility to admit the person in front of you may not be who your fear expected them to be. This doesn't mean that everyone deserves access to you. Some people reveal themselves quickly, and when they do, believe the pattern, but don't create the pattern for them. Let people show you who they are. Then have the courage to see it clearly. Stay awake without becoming naive or cynical, because when nobody is trying to win, the whole conversation changes. People stop performing long enough for honesty to breathe. Defensiveness loses some of its control. The room feels different because no one is being forced into a role they didn't choose. Real communication begins there. And no, it most definitely will not be comfortable all the time. An honest conversation may show you that you misunderstood something, maybe spoke with more edge than you realized, or turned a fear into a fact too quickly. It can also reveal the other person's intention was better than you assumed, which is sometimes annoying because now you have to put down the speech you were preparing. Honesty always asks something from you. This is why people avoid it. Once you understand, you lose the comfort of pretending you don't. Avoiding the real question lets me keep pitching. Refusing to hear your pain lets me protect my intention. Ignoring who you actually are lets my assumptions stay comfortable, and misunderstanding the problem gives me permission to keep pushing the solution I already thought of and wanted to give. This is the comfort of not listening. You get to stay right, but staying right can keep you stuck. So when I say, sell me this pen, I'm not talking about the pen. I'm asking whether you know how to have a conversation without making yourself the center of it. Curiosity has to come before performance. A question has to come before the assumption. Listening has to matter more than steering every answer towards your agenda. That is the real test. It shows up when a date becomes a polished audition, when an argument turns into a courtroom, when old pain makes a new person look guilty, when advice becomes pressure, when leadership becomes ego, and when concern becomes control. At that point, conversation stops being connection. It becomes conquest. And we already have enough of that. Everyone is trying to win attention, approval, status, the room, the narrative, the breakup, the last word, and the argument that they're still having in their head 3 days later. But a real conversation doesn't need to be one. Enter it honestly. That requires strength. And I mean the strength to admit that you may have misunderstood, to let someone else's truth exist without immediately making it a threat to yours, and to protect your heart without projecting your past onto every new person who gets close enough to be seen. That kind of strength is rare, but it's also what makes real connection possible. So before your next hard conversation, your next first date, your next argument, your next your next sales pitch, your next piece of advice, or your next moment where you feel that urge to convince, pause long enough to ask yourself, what are you really doing? At that point, the question is simple. Are you trying to understand, or are you trying to win? Because sometimes the conversation reveals the other person. Sometimes it reveals the relationship. And sometimes, whether you like it or not, it reveals you. Before you try to win the conversation, ask yourself what it might cost if you do. That's pretty much it. Thank you so much for joining me. If you think this episode made you think of somebody in specific because of everything that I talked about, somebody that you just think like, oh my God, this makes so much sense, maybe you should send it to them. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, for more conversations on love, dating, relationships, and self-awareness, You can find my books, podcast episodes, and coaching services at joeyfrancis.com. That's JOEYFRANCESS.com. And until next time, be good to yourself and be good to each other. And before I go, I want to leave you with this. A conversation you win can still be a connection you lose. Until next time.